At first, it was just smoke. A few lazy wisps curling out of a hole in the ground near the cemetery. No alarm, no panic, just a faint smell of burning trash. But beneath the surface, something ancient had awakened. And once it started, nothing could stop it. The fire was alive. It moved in silence. It fed on the bones of the earth. And before long, an entire town would vanish. In the early 1800s, settlers found something valuable buried deep beneath the hills of eastern Pennsylvania. Anthracite coal. Dense. Powerful. The kind that could fuel factories, trains, and the rise of American industry. And right above one of the richest veins sat a quiet little town, Centralia. By the 1860s, the town was booming. Coal was the heart of everything. Men worked the mines. Families built lives. Children grew up breathing black dust and calling it home. Coal was money. Coal was life. But no one thought about what would happen when the mines were empty. No one thought about what was still alive beneath their feet. Centralia wasn't just built on coal. It was built into it. Over the years, miners carved hundreds of miles of underground tunnels. Some active, some collapsed, some forgotten entirely. To walk through Centralia in the 1950s was to walk above a sleeping giant. A maze of passageways, cracks, and caverns all filled with flammable fuel. People got used to it. They trusted the land. And the land waited. Memorial Day, 1962. The town wanted to clean up the local landfill near the edge of the old mine. So someone, no one knows who for sure, lit a small fire in the trash pit. They thought it would burn for a few hours and die out, but the fire slipped through a crack, down into the old coal seams. And then, it kept going. There were warning signs, smoke rising from strange places, a sulfur smell in the air, heat radiating from the ground where it shouldn't. But it was slow and invisible. Officials tossed dirt on it, said it was under control. They were wrong. By 1969, parts of the town were heating up. Basements were warm year-round, driveways cracked, pipes warped. Still, no evacuation, no emergency. Then came the gas. Carbon monoxide leaked through the cracks. Some residents complained of headaches. Some collapsed. Pets went missing. A gas station owner checked the underground tank with a thermometer. The reading? 172 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was the beginning of the panic. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking through his backyard when the ground opened beneath him. A sinkhole, sudden, deep, filled with hot steam, pulled him down. He grabbed onto tree roots, screamed. His cousin ran to help and pulled him out just in time. The sinkhole was over 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep, with a deadly mix of heat and gas swirling at the bottom. That day, Centralia could no longer pretend everything was fine. Even then, even with a boy nearly swallowed alive, it took years for action. The town was divided. Some people begged to leave. Others insisted the threat was exaggerated. The government hesitated. Who was responsible? Who would pay? In the end, they bought time, instead of fixing the problem. But coal fires don't wait. They burn underground. They move on their own. And they don't need oxygen from the air, because the earth feeds them. Experts mapped the underground fire. It was growing, branching, moving like roots of flame beneath homes, streets, schools. They drilled. They dumped clay. They poured in slurry to try and choke it out. It didn't work. The fire had already spread too far, through miles of old tunnels, into abandoned seams, under entire blocks. And worst of all, no one could tell where it would strike next. By the early 1980s, the government started buying out homes. People were offered relocation money. Some took it and left. Others refused. Houses stood empty, then demolished. Yards turned to weeds. Roads cracked and buckled from the heat beneath. You could walk down a block where families once gathered for barbecues. And now, nothing but chimney stacks and silence. Centralia was still alive, but barely. And beneath it all, the fire never stopped. It began with a spark. It grew in silence. And by the time they believed it, the ground was already gone. But the fight wasn't over yet, because some residents refused to leave. They stayed. They challenged the government. They walked through smoke-filled streets, calling this cursed place home. And what happened next? Well, if you're still watching, if this story pulls at you the way it pulls at the earth, like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to History Mind. It helps more than you know. The story of Centralia isn't just about fire. It's about the people who stayed to face it. And that is where we pick up next. After the sinkhole incident that nearly swallowed 12-year-old Todd Domboski, things in Centralia changed. Not suddenly, but steadily. People stopped letting their kids play in the yard. Mailboxes leaned over cracked sidewalks. Steam hissed up from the ground like warning breaths. The ground was no longer safe. The fire, still invisible, was now everywhere. Beneath homes, under streets, deep in the soil. It released carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide, a poisonous mix that made every breath a gamble. You'd wake up with headaches, nausea, confusion, and yet people stayed. Why didn't they leave? Some said it was denial, others called it pride, but for many it was simple. Centralia was home. Families had lived here for generations. They'd survived mine collapses, strikes, economic downturns. To them, the fire was just one more hardship. And besides, not everyone could afford to start over. Some residents even began fighting against the government's evacuation plans. Lawsuits were filed. Town meetings grew tense. Neighbors turned on each other, those who stayed versus those who sold. And while the people argued above ground, the fire kept moving below. In 1984, over 2 decades after the fire began, the federal government finally stepped in with a $42 million relocation plan. Over 500 buildings were condemned. People were offered money to leave. Most accepted, but a stubborn few remained, claiming the threat was exaggerated. By 1990, the U.S. Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code, 17927. Maps were updated, roads were closed, buildings were bulldozed. But even then, a handful of residents still wouldn't go. Geologists and engineers studied the fire's spread. What they found was terrifying. The underground blaze covered an area nearly 400 acres wide. It had reached temperatures of over 1,000 degrees in places, and it was still expanding, consuming coal seams like veins of fuel. And here's the real kicker. No one could stop it. They tried trenching, flushing, sealing, and starving it. Nothing worked. Because to kill the fire, you'd have to kill the ground itself. By the early 2000s, only a handful of residents remained. There were no schools, no businesses, no stores or public buildings, just empty streets, nature taking back the land, and the occasional no trespassing sign on what used to be someone's front lawn. The cemetery still sits near the original fire site. Quiet, eerie, undisturbed. It's said the fire started in that landfill beside the graveyard, like the dead were trying to speak, and the ground listened. In 2013, after years of legal battles, the remaining residents were allowed to stay, but only until they died. Once they passed, the properties would be seized, and one by one, the windows went dark. Centralia had once been a town of over 1,400 people. By 2020, fewer than 5 lived there, but they never left. Not for the fire, not for the money, not for the silence. To them, Centralia wasn't cursed. It was sacred. For years, one of the last symbols of the town was Route 61, the highway that once led through Centralia. It became warped by the heat, split and buckled like a scar across the land. Eventually, it was closed and abandoned. Locals turned it into a canvas. Spray paint covered the pavement. Messages, art, rebellion. They called it the Graffiti Highway. For many, it was the only way to remember what Centralia once was. In 2020, even that was buried. The government dumped dirt and debris to cover it forever, as if trying one last time to erase what happened here. Centralia isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror. It shows what happens when warnings are ignored, when greed overtakes caution, when nature is treated like a machine. The fire underneath Centralia still burns today. Estimates say it could smolder for another 250 years. And even when the last resident is gone, the town will keep breathing smoke. Not through voices or stories, but through silence. Some towns die with a bang. Others fade into memory. But Centralia burned. It burned quietly, relentlessly, with no enemy to fight and no hero to save it. And now it waits, under dirt and ash, for someone to remember it. If this story made you feel something, if it gave you chills or made you wonder how many other forgotten places are out there, then like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to History Mind. We bring the forgotten back to life, one untold story at a time. Because sometimes, the most haunting history is the one still burning beneath our feet.